Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. We're here Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with our legal experts, Edward Pichado Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. But today, Mr. Russell is doing what attorneys do, advocating for clients in the middle of a case and unable to be live on the show for right now, but definitely always sends his regards. I can't believe we are well into the month of February and second show of the month. But Senor Pichado, buenas
Hello.
tardes.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, mi gente. Everybody in there, out there, listening to the sounds of the show. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure you're going to find information to be fulfilling as well as educational. So hang on to your seats. And just would like to mention that once again, I'm filming off of location, so please be patient with any random sounds you may hear in the background. It's definitely not of my making.
Well, and the show must go on. So we appreciate you being on and able to participate, as we know that the attorney's schedule can change at any moment, and we are flexible with that. So we always pause to recognize those who have transitioned. I believe this could be a week where we haven't been notified of any public news, but I do know of friends and family who continue to deal with loss. So we always send our love and our condolences to those who are in that situation. So there's some breaking news that happened today that really changes some of the dynamics when we think about what's going on with this COVID pandemic. I know everyone is praying and hoping and wishing that we could go back to things the way they used to be. The truth is, it will never really be normal again, but we're going to have to learn how to live and deal and make adjustments according to how this virus presents itself. So apparently, Governor Hochul has literally just announced that the vaccination or mask mandate for New York businesses seems to be lifted. So there are some exceptions, but she announced the end of the mask mandate in New York State effective Thursday, but city and school mandates will remain in place. So this is really speaking more to some of the more suburban areas upstate, because downstate we still have the same mandates in place. And she did name some exceptions like homeless shelters, healthcare centers, state run nursing homes, correctional facilities, schools and daycares. So she said, we saw it coming. It happened. We hit our peak on January 7th, but now we've noticed a 93% drop in cases. And that's what she's been waiting for to make this announcement. And she also talked about your prerogative. So this is getting some interesting feedback. And I know there's a quote from one of Mayor Adams' spokespersons, Fabian Levy, who said, we're continuing to follow the science and the guidance of public health professionals to keep New York safe. And we encourage all New Yorkers to continue to wear high quality masks when indoors or in crowded spaces, and to get vaccinated and boosted to stop the spread. So there's definitely one very loud, resonating thought process for the city, but the state doing something a little bit different. So what say you, Mr. Machado?
Well, the governor is the governor of the state, so she has the power to do these statewide mandates. Of course, it was recently challenged, but then appealed, and the city gets to do its own mandate. I mean, right now it's clear that for me this is more of a it's not just a follow the science decision, because I guess the basis was the declining numbers, but it's quite clear that there is a certain segment of the population that finds these mandates very unpopular. You also have the members of the business community that from day one have been complaining of having to carry the onus of having to enforce some of these mandates. And, as you can see, it contains several exceptions prior to the announcement when, there were rumors or kind of, an awaiting of her, making this decision or this declaration, this announcement. I know there were several parents who were complaining that the mandate should not be removed in the schools, while some parents were saying the opposite. So I guess those parents who wanted to keep those in place have won out, and I would imagine for good reason, because I haven't looked lately, but people have always been reluctant to get the more younger students vaccinated, even though they approved vaccinations, I believe, for 5 and older. So listen, it's interesting times. Wait and see. I know recently there was an announcement, I guess earlier this week, about a group of workers who right now are rubbing up against a deadline for having to get vaccinated. So it's an ongoing drama, to say the least.
It definitely is ongoing. The part about the mask, though, that I don't understand the debate on, it's an airborne virus. So wearing a mask protects you. Whatever your thoughts and feelings are, vax, anti-vax, the mask should be a non-negotiable conversation if it's going to keep you safe. So that's the part where I'm confused as to why we've made it such a political issue on wearing a mask, if that will prevent an airborne disease from attacking your body. Somebody help me. I don't know. Is it me?
Well, I mean, this whole issue has been intertwined with the issue of freedom. And
Mm.
I mean, I've heard people say they should be free to open themselves to infection. I mean, if they don't want to wear a mask, then they should be allowed not to, not even thinking about, well, what if I get it and I pass it on to others? Never mind that. Or by extension, having to get vaccinated and the freedom to or not to. I mean, I don't
But
necessarily
but we
buy all those arguments, but you
but
know,
Senor Pachado, now
uh,
I can get into the arguments over whether or not people, for whatever reasons, want to get vaccinated or not vaccinated. It's an airborne virus. Like, if everybody is not totally vaccinated. I mean, every other vaccination that we have, and we can have the medical experts weigh in on that. The reason why cases have gone down and you get chicken pox and measles and all the things that kids have to get is because there's a certain protection if there's inoculation across the board. But I'm talking about a mask where we don't have widespread vaccination. So a mask is able to protect at some level if it's a highly effective one, as the quote came from the staffer from the mayor's office. So, I'm not going to debate it anymore. I'm just.
well, listen. I never said that these arguments make sense. I just said that the arguments are being made, and I heard as recently, I guess, as a week ago, Astorino, the Republican contender for governor, apparently, and Swazi, the Democratic challenger, or one of the Dems, including the governor running for the office, like criticizing the governor for maintaining the mandates, even though the numbers were declining. So
Oh.
I would imagine they're saying these things during the campaign because they feel that they're getting some traction or with these positions. Whether they are or not authentically, I'm not sure. But
And what's funny about that, because the numbers are going down. Well, why are the numbers going down? Because people are wearing masks? Like, oh my gosh. Okay. I'm gonna
masks, I would say vaccinations. I mean, those, I mean, Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll leave it alone. It's the little things for me, and the little thing can be a big thing with just protecting ourselves with a mask. And that someone who didn't plan on entertaining Omicron and had to entertain Omicron, I know how this virus is. It is not pretty, it is not nice. I'm grateful
Uh-huh.
that, I was able
Me
to
too.
be and fight it, but why put ourselves through unnecessary I don't know. Moving on in the news, we will watch this because clearly the vaccine mandate, the mask mandates, all of this will be politicized. I'm more concerned about people's health, wellness, and life. We have lost
Same.
loved ones, right? Our community is had the highest numbers when it comes to what we've seen happen and how the disparities in healthcare have aided in the loss of life. So just use wisdom. That's really ultimately the bottom line of what we're saying. Use wisdom with all the mandates and different things that are happening, being released or lessened. Just protect yourself and protect those that you love, because a carrier could unawares affect someone, right? And we don't want people to die early. We don't want you to have a premature departure from this planet. We need you here to share your brilliance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we will continue. That's just my thing. I'm just confused when I read these headlines. And you didn't say it made sense. That is true. But you did share what's happening. But now, unfortunately, we get into the meat of some of the other headlines that aren't nice. And this is a story that we've been hearing about since the unfortunate incident where we have once again another death due to the no knock policy that is happening out in Minneapolis. I know that the mayor froze any more, I guess, executions of those no knocks once this happened. And then there's evolving story around who they were actually looking for being related to Amir Locke, and that he was in the bed, was startled. He had his hand on the gun, and it's been a very graphic showing that the news has done when you hear those bullets ring out. And it's the nightmare for any family, especially any parent. But what's really going on? And even with a no knock, and if that was the intended person, is that how it's supposed to go down?
Well, with the no knock, you're supposed to knock, which is really the announcement before the entry. So you give some time for the individual inside to respond before going ahead. In this instance, what you have body cam footage. My understanding, because I haven't watched the video myself, of the officer placing the key into the lock, opening, saying police, and entering, and then right away, as soon as the young man gets startled and they see a weapon in his hand, he's wrapped in a blanket, they automatically start firing. The weapon wasn't pointed at them. There was no evidence that it was being used. It was simply in the hand. Also, my understanding is that this warrant was granted in connection with the investigation of a homicide that occurred in neighboring St. Paul, Minnesota, because this happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So apparently Amir Locke wasn't even the target. It was just the search for an individual who was supposed to be at that residence. The other wrinkle here, the other issue here, of course, is that from what the family is saying, which hasn't been disputed to my knowledge, is that Amir Locke was legally in possession of that weapon. So that's another problem here, because you certainly are allowed to possess a legally registered firearm within your home. Not to mention you have unknown intruders coming in. Not that he, which is kind of one of the issues that came up during, what we're going to talk about next is the Breonna Taylor case. But this is one of the, of course, the fundamental problems with, these knocking, no knock and then knocking and now search warrants is this, these no knock search warrants rather, which is you're not announcing, and see the other side of it is normally when they issue these, it's for some sort of there has to be some exigent circumstances, some purpose that either evidence is going to be destroyed or the officers entering are going to be in danger if they do knock. But normally it's more so for the destruction of evidence because you want to get in there quickly and not allow the suspect to destroy the evidence that is being sought. So, this is a serious problem that needs to be dealt with throughout the country. And, I'm pretty confident that this is going to get sorted out by the Minneapolis AG, Keith Ellison. He's the same one that handled the George Floyd matter there in Minneapolis. So hopefully, Keith gets to the bottom of this and gets this family some justice.
I really hope so, because watching it play out, and I normally don't like to watch and see because it they warn you, but oh my goodness, when will we be able to report that these things don't happen? Because I just wonder, do they have these no knock warrants in other communities? Do they come in as aggressive in other places? And this is what lends to the ongoing tension that we're seeing across the country. And I know they were protesting, and it gets to a point where the trauma and the repeated trauma of seeing it is unbearable for a lot of people, and it bears on mental health and the frustration of feeling like, once again, here we go again. When will things change? So our prayers go out to the family.
Well, these are from some research I did about a year ago, and just from my general knowledge, these no knocks were born out of the war on drugs. Like I mentioned, the emphasis for a lot of these was, we want to get in there before the evidence is destroyed. This idea that while you're knocking, somebody's flushing the drugs down the toilet, like in Goodfellas. But the problem is that the execution of these can lead to all sorts of problems and dangers, not only for the people inside, but for the officers themselves, even. So they definitely, in my view, that definitely should be eliminated. I believe there was a study regarding the effectiveness of these, and they aren't even effective even by the numbers in terms of the so-called objectives and the reasons for these. So I hope these are the last vestiges of this practice, and that they disappear themselves into history.
We hope so, but I know it's going to be a while for this case to get sorted out and all the details. And I know the family is calling for justice, as they should. And then the other layer of who they were going, to investigate, or who was named in what the reason was for the no knock. So I'm sure all of that will be continue to be aired in the public discourse. But amongst all of this, there is a family that's heartbroken.
Absolutely.
And we, send our love and prayers. And this is part of what we continually talk about on the show, being at the forefront of the conversations that need to happen in order for change to occur. And if these no knock warrants aren't effective, that they need to be done away with. Like, there should be no delay. It should be expedient and swift action. But that comes from those who stay on the ground, constantly advocating and lobbying for the changes in making things a fair and equitable situation for all of those who live in this country. So now we go to reporting on the fact that there is jury selection happening on the case of Breonna Taylor, and there's some updates here.
Well, it's Breonna Taylor related, as the headline
Yeah.
states, and the reason why the term related is being used is, remember, what was it, maybe a year and a half ago or more, the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron presented a case involving the direct death of Breonna Taylor to a grand jury, and there was a failure to indict. And then, if you remember the drama in terms of getting the minutes of the transcript of that grand jury proceeding released, and then jurors revealing that Cameron had actually not presented homicide charges to them. So this says related because this trial right here is not for the death of Breonna Taylor, but instead the shots that were fired by Officer Brett Hankerson that found themselves in the neighbors' homes. Thus, there's 3 wanton endangerment charges. He's basically charged with endangering the lives of those neighbors by recklessly shooting into the Taylor home. So those shots were fired into these neighbors' homes. He's being charged with those, and there was an indictment in that case. So now you have a trial, you have jury selection, and I believe the defense has been trying to get the trial moved, and they were unsuccessful. And also, some of that was based, I believe, on the quote unquote, unfair publicity, during jury selection. Jurors who have expressed a view that the officer is guilty from what they've heard in the news have been removed. The jury selection apparently has been very vigorous and apparently contentious in terms of making sure that the panel that ultimately gets selected is not one that's predisposed, but is simply going to listen to the evidence and not be confused about actually what the case is about. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least. It's definitely not justice for the family, because what you have here basically is one officer, and I believe there were 2 or 3 others. Those others aren't being charged, even
Well,
though they participated in the entry into this home.
well, isn't the reason why the others aren't getting charged is because their bullets didn't end up in the neighboring apartment, endangering those residents? So I
Yeah,
think
I believe that's correct. It's been some time since I looked at the exact details of this case, but I believe that's correct.
so. They said that the challenge that you were just explaining is because it has been publicized, but the candidates were also asked, the jury candidates were asked about their experience with firearms and their opinion. So they
Yeah,
were
yeah.
expressing that he was guilty and they felt he was guilty. So it's made this jury jury selection really challenging
Yeah.
for
No,
them.
yeah, because you've had news, over the course of time, protests. In fact, the case ended up leading to a ban on no-knock search warrants in the city of Louisville. And I'm not sure if the state of Kentucky outlawed it, but certainly the municipality of Louisville, the city of Louisville. So a lot has happened, and of course, it galvanized an entire movement throughout the entire country. And you hear the name Breonna Taylor even on an international scale.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Well, I want to see how far this goes because that once again would send a very loud message when it comes to how we deal with these sorts of cases. And, just being mindful. I mean, someone in that apartment could have died, and what would they receive? Oops, sorry, my bad. Like, that's 3
Absolutely.
bullets. That could have killed somebody else. So we cover it all here on the show. We talked about the fact that when officers are in danger, like the 2 officers that we, shared our condolences right here in Harlem, that's not right. And, having someone lose their life unfairly in a no knock, that's not right. So we're advocating for things that we see happening to be treated fairly across the board, and that those who are advocates help to raise what needs to be looked at. If we're quiet and silent and nobody knows, then these things just happen and it's on to the next headline. But how do we really make sure that we stay on the forefront of advocating for justice and equity across the board when it comes to our criminal justice system? Hey there, Bishop Lewis. Thank you for tuning in. So now we go to another interesting story that came up in the news about someone registering to vote. Now, how can registering to vote go so bad that you end up with a sentence going
Of
to
six,
prison?
yeah, of 6 years. Well, this case emanates out of Tennessee, regarding a Pamela Moses. She had been convicted back in 2015 of some felonies, and I believe 2 felonies, and she was ended up being placed on probation, and she eventually apparently turned her life around, became involved in Black Lives Matter, and she got involved in the whole movement regarding the restoration of voting rights for felons, including herself. So apparently, she approached her probation officer about her probation, and that, to her understanding, well, first of all, she is claiming that at the time that she was sentenced, that she was never told that she would be losing her right to vote. Now, that is standard when it comes time for sentencing. When someone is convicted of a felony, the judge, as part of the sentencing, states to the defendant that by them pleading guilty to this felony or being convicted of this felony, that they will be losing their right to vote. And apparently, Ms. Moses is saying that that wasn't stated to her at the time of her sentencing, which may be in of itself have some maybe a possible appellate issue. I'm not sure if it's one that's been deemed waived because of the passage of time, or whether it can be invoked in the appeal of this conviction. But that's an issue. And then she states that based on her calculations, that her probation was actually over, and she goes to her probation officer, makes her case. Probation officer agrees, signs off on a certificate of restoration that then she then takes and uses to then get registered to vote. Now, mind you, she never actually voted, but registered. Apparently, this probation officer then contacts the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Corrections informs her that actually Miss Moses' probation has not ended and that it is still active. And the article is not clear on what was done to rescind or inform Miss Moses of that reversal or that decision, but she there's no debate in the article that she actually did get the certificate. Now, the judge who sentenced her, and I'm not sure if this was a bench trial or a jury trial, but the judge who sentenced her apparently is claiming that she tricked this probation officer into signing off on this document, restoring her voting rights. In Tennessee, by the way, apparently, in order for a convicted felon to be able to vote, they need to actively get their voting rights restored by way of a restoration document from a probation officer or one signed by a court clerk, a city clerk. And she went the probation officer route on, in terms of that law. And just for the audience in New York, it doesn't work that way. If you were convicted of a felony and you finished your prison sentence and you're no longer under supervision, then you're allowed to automatically vote. There's not a quote unquote restoration document that you have to obtain in order to be able to vote. So that's, a difference there. But apparently the NAACP Legal Defense Fund is siding with Ms. Moses, and either they or another nonprofit organization is actively involved in the appeal of this conviction and or sentence. And so, this is going to be part of a larger fight that's taking place around the country regarding the voting rights of felons and their ability to vote after conviction, and in many states after they are no longer under any sort of supervision, but simply have this conviction sitting on their record.
That's interesting, though, that they're claiming that she tried to trick. She said she didn't falsify anything. She was just trying to get her right to vote back, and they gave her that information. So if they made a mistake on the calculation, how does it fall on her? I guess that's what the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has to figure out.
Yeah. And one of the statements that she made was that I was convicted of falsifying a document that I did not even sign. Normally, she's right. Normally those types of charges, and I haven't examined, I'll be forthright with the audience here. I haven't examined the particular elements of this exact charge, didn't get an opportunity to, but usually that is one of the elements that the person actually had signed or attested to the accuracy of the document. In this case, it's not her attesting to the accuracy, it's this government official, who apparently signed and then decided, oh, well, let me call up the Department of Corrections and find out, which I would argue she should have done in the first place. If she wasn't clearly sure or didn't or was reluctant to agree to the calculation that was, I would imagine that Ms. Moses was arguing that she was sentenced on a particular day and that, now it's this date and, my probation is, over, that was something that before she signed that document and handed that document to Ms. Moses that she should have verified, so, now, like I said, once again, the devil's in the details. Was this a case where Ms. Moses was informed that, oh, listen, that document that I gave you there, well, that's no longer good because, I contacted the Department of Corrections and I found out that, you got another month, another week, or another day of probation. And so, that document is no longer good. And whether that was put in writing, what type of notice did she receive? Did it occur before or after she went and registered to vote? Those are all questions that I imagine would have come up and will be examined in any appellate proceeding.
I would hope so, because it's just a very peculiar situation, and I really hope that the nonprofits that are helping her get her the justice that she deserves, because I can't even imagine, like, you do what you're supposed to do, and they said she was removed from the roles, didn't know until she went to run for mayor. Like, there's so many layers to it that would lead one to believe that it's not all adding up, in a way that makes logical sense. So, if
Well,
she can prove
another thing that came out in this case was that which was brought up by the NAACP publicly, is that to their knowledge, or what they're saying is that actual white citizens of that state who've been convicted of voter fraud have received nowhere near either this type of sentence or even this type of charge, apparently. So this sentence of 6 years and a day, is my understanding, is being levied upon her because of her race, apparently, and her affiliation with Black Lives Matter.
interesting.
There is a constitutional right to a freedom of association. So if she's being targeted because of affiliation, that's also something that needs to be looked at.
Interesting. Definitely one that we will track and see what comes of it. And, once again, this is where the legal meets the cultural. So we also talk about the fact that there's sometimes some backlash according to what it is that you do. I mean, that's,
I
and it
mean,
shouldn't be.
listen, there shouldn't even be a prohibition, for convicted felons in terms of voting. I'm not, I've never been actually clear on why, there's even that correlation. I mean, maybe while somebody is confined, maybe you could say that, but once they're out and they've completed their sentence, what is, why the bar, except to disenfranchise a particular population that's not favorable to conservatives of any stripe. So I've always had a problem with this prohibition, and I've actively fought to inform convicted felons of their right to vote, because most, as is well documented, a disproportionate amount of Black men in our community have these felonies on their record. And when you ask them, hey, listen, did you vote? They're like, nah, I can't vote because I'm a felon. And that's the end of the story. They don't even know that, listen, did you finish your probation? Oh, yeah, that was a long time ago. Did you finish it? Yeah, man, that was years ago. Well, listen, man, you should be able to vote. And they're like, oh, man, I didn't know that. Every time it's time to vote, I think I can't, and so, with a lot of the protests that occurred last summer and so forth, there's also been that parallel movement too, in terms of, getting these individuals back active in terms of exercising the franchise, because that's an entire voting block that's just missing. Just
Missing from the roles. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and those in conservative positions who feel like the minute you commit a crime, you should be, banished to the phantom zone, is like, and then meanwhile, many of these conservatives are later convicted of crimes themselves, and then nobody talks about them and whether they should be banned from, participating in the electorate. You see many come back after they either get out of prison or whatever, and want to boldly run for office
Yeah.
afterwards. I mean, it's
Yeah. We've seen
the
that.
temerity.
Yeah, it really, oh my goodness. We could go on that one, but we will definitely watch and see what happens. And at least there are agencies and nonprofits like NAACP Legal Defense Fund that can be called in situations like this, where it's seemingly a huge violation of her rights. And speaking of rights, in the highest court in the land, as we start to wind down the show, interesting news that we have been seeing unwind, and we touched on it a little bit. We didn't go deep into it on our previous show, but this case for impeaching Clarence Thomas because of what his right wing, as they say, his right wing activist wife has a clear interest. He's not recusing himself. So, what do you say about this?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening here is that, first of all, one of the big problems that people don't know about is that while there is a judicial code of conduct and ethics for just about every judge, and in the federal system, which is where the Supreme Court lies, for federal judges in general, that same code does not exist for the Supreme Court justices themselves. Okay, so there is no clarity as to whether or not by law what Clarence Thomas's wife is doing and her possible influence on him, whether or not that legally can make him recuse himself. His wife has been, she's part of apparently some organization that brought in the January 6th insurrectionist terrorists to the Capitol. So wow. They actively, brought them there by the busload. By the way, her name is Ginni Thomas, Jinni. And, she's part of the Heritage Foundation. She was actively involved during the Bush v. Gore case that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, no recusal. And with the January 6th insurrection, all indications are that a number of those cases may very well end up at the Supreme Court, because a lot of these defendants are like coming up with some, like, what I would say, nonsensical arguments that will possibly be, carry their way through the appellate courts, through the circuit, and then up to the Supreme Court to be considered. So the question is whether or not, Clarence is going to, recuse himself. And also during the Obamacare, and when that went up to the high court in terms of its constitutionality, she was actively involved in criticizing, that legislation and that law. No recusal there. There's also word that she's taken money for groups that have filed amicus briefs. And what is an amicus brief? For the audience, an amicus brief is a brief that's filed by someone purporting to be a friend of the court, opining on a pending case, basically saying, hey, listen, please consider this brief during your determination as to the validity of one party's arguments versus another. And those are actual briefs that are filed and in a number of cases considered by the justices. Who's to say that, she says to Claire, hey, listen, this organization has funded our new deck or our new home. Let's be kind to them. We just don't know, but it looks bad when you have a spouse who's this active and you don't at all feel the need to say, hey, listen, on this one, I'm going to recuse myself because
just
it looks inappropriate. It doesn't look right.
I think
not to mention the disclosure of funds, like what's happening with with taking money from a group, filing an amicus brief, in terms of financial disclosure. So, there needs to be some consideration here. And the reason why I felt it necessary to have us, and that we felt it necessary to talk about this on this show is because we're not sure that this is something that's really being talked about, especially now when you have President Biden considering the appointment of the first African American black justice to the Supreme Court, and he is the only would be the only African American right now currently on the court, much to the disappointment of conservatives of color, I must say.
Well, that in and of itself is a whole nother story. But to your point, sometimes we need to consider what the optics are, how that looks. And I wonder if he is really feeling any pressure to recuse himself because he hasn't. So is anything going
Well,
to really
there's no legal pressure, and that's the problem. Congress needs to go ahead and legislate a judicial code of conduct and ethics for these justices. They need to.
Well, what they need to do and what they will do under these current conditions, yet to be seen, but definitely for our audience to be aware of what's happening and the fact that it will be all over the news if President Biden does nominate a black female, African American female, to sit on the highest court of the land. I want to see what the opposition will say to the candidates that come forward. We know that Mr. Russell gave his commentary on like, why did you have to say what you were going to do so early to give folks a chance to try to start planting the wrong seeds in what could be a historic opportunity for a black woman to sit in that seat.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I partially agree with our colleague on that. It didn't necessarily have to be said because the most important thing is the act and not so much the announcement. At the same time, though, it really shouldn't matter. I mean, at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with President Biden wanting to correct an otherwise historical wrong. I mean, it's wrong that to date we have not had an African American female as a justice on the highest court of the land. There is a plethora of black female jurists who are seasoned, smart, scholarly, and more than capable and qualified of serving on the highest court. It's been proven, it's been said, it's been done. I mean, there's no reason why we've had to wait this long to find someone. And I hearken back to Sandra Day O'Connor and Ronald Reagan's appointment of her. When and at that time, the question was there affirmative action going on there? And clearly, it was clear that with all of the female attorneys in the country, that it was appalling that at that time there were no women on the court, period. So as we move forward in history, it's clear that we have to consider those who have not been considered in the past and give them a fair opportunity, and also have a court that reflects America. Okay, because that's what we need to make clear here. If we're America, then our highest institutions have to reflect what we are. And the idea that right now the status quo is clearly unacceptable.
Point well taken. And we need to make sure that we share our voices, that it does need to reflect, what we have and what we represent here in our country. So we are at the close of the show. We had quite a bit to go over today, and we know that the headlines continue to be populated with stories that affect us a little bit differently sometimes. It's where the legal meets the cultural, and we have our two legal experts that can lend some insight and something sometimes something more global that just affects us as citizens, particularly here in this country, where we're talking about the headlines. So, as we close out today, just stay safe and stay well. I know that the Valentine's holiday is approaching, but I'm a firm believer that every day is a day to share love. So we're sharing love with you here from Speaking Legally. And just check on a neighbor, check on a friend. There's so much happening around us. And we want to make sure that simple acts of kindness, we don't wait till one day to share and send love, Valentine's, etc. You know, people make money off all the commercialism, but I'm a proponent that every day is a day to share that love. So, from my heart to your household, sending you some love. And on behalf of Mr. Russell as well, who is working, I'm sure he would have his own very specific comments to share. But I will turn it over to you, Senor Pachado, to close out for us today. And we'll see you next week, same place, same time.
Well, folks, I'm in the mood for love simply because you're near me. Nah, let me stop. Listen, folks, definitely this is the season of love. And I'm a proponent of love. I love my people. I love my community. And so I would ask you to do the same. And please stay tuned. And until the next time, let's move forward.
Absolutely. Black History Month is every day is Black History, but we know we're still celebrating. Enjoy some of the celebrations. Learn a fun fact, especially for those who don't know and who watch the show and you appreciate what we share. Learn a little about the fact that our story began before slavery.
Oh
But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so,
no. The other day, I was, I was reminded that the internet was invented by an African American man, Emmett McHenry, I believe it was. He had gotten the contract to invent the domain name registration, which eventually resulted in the complex code that led to .com, .net, .gov, and all of those that allow us to be able to communicate on the internet. Former veteran, entrepreneur, just an amazing individual. Read up on him.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that fun Black History fact. And go look him up and learn about the brother. All right, everyone. Stay safe, be well. And I still say wear a mask if you're in public. Bye for now.
All right.